Welcome to Lesson 9, Managing Risk in Real Estate Development. So here we're going to talk through some strategies on how to minimize your losses. And yes, you will have loss, loss of time, loss of money, loss of sleep. There will be some losses, but how can we mitigate for those? How can we solve for those so that we don't lose everything on one deal? Okay, that's what we're going to talk about. So how to avoid risk? Well, risk is everywhere. When you woke up this morning, you took a risk by getting out of bed. You took a risk of falling. You took a risk of, walking fast or walking quickly when you got out of bed before you had all your faculties, before you had all your consciousness about yourself. You're half asleep and you made it to the bathroom and you did what you had to do. And then you came out, and before you had your coffee, all of that was a risk. Getting to the coffee maker was a risk. Every day you leave your house and you get in your car, that's a risk. When your kids go to school and go to work and, all these things, that's a risk. Everything's a risk. How do you lower your risk in life, but specifically in real estate? Because I could talk about life all day long, but we're here to talk about real estate development. So how do you lower your risk in real estate development? Number one, avoid the risk. Sometimes you can avoid risks by having more information. So everything I've taught you up until this point is really about seeking more information, knowing as much as you can before you get in so that you can avoid the risk of failure altogether. Doesn't mean you won't fail, but you avoid the risk of failure, the risk of negativity by taking advantage of all the information available to you up front. Secondly, risk control. To control your risk is to understand what the risk is and put things in place, strategies in place so that you can control what's happening. Now, I'm a control person, not freak, and I like to control things. But there are times when I have to yield, and my higher power is God. I have to yield to God to control those things for me. So when I yield and I let Him take over, you let God be in control, it gives me a sense of calm and a sense of reprieve and a sense of settle. But sometimes I try to control the real estate development process. And you will soon learn that you can't control every part of this process. Just like you can't control every part of your life, you cannot control every part of real estate development. Sometimes you just have to go with the flow. So you control what you can from a risk perspective and solve for what you can. But when you can't, don't keep beating your head up against the wall trying to fix it. Just rest and let it pass. And this too shall pass, and you will get through it to move on to another day. Again, don't rush the process. Development is slow and long, but it's worth it. Do not rush. You can also transfer your risk. Now, transferring risk really involves moving the risk that has been identified to someone or something else. Insurance is one of those ways that we see later in our list, but insurance is a way you can transfer risk. Putting the risk on someone else to do. So for instance, if a contractor is coming to a job, making sure that contractor has the necessary insurances, the bonds that are required to do the work, it's beneficial to you up front because you can help transfer some of the risk of the development to that particular contractor because he or she or they have all the right insurances in place. They have all the paperwork and the compliance pieces in place so that if something happens under their watch, then they can file their insurance. They can file against their compliance pieces that they have in place. It's not all on you or all on your client as the developer or as the client participant. So transferring risk is a way to help manage your risk. Diversification. Sharing and spreading out all of your money or all of your time and your resources across multiple projects. So all of your eggs are not in one basket. All of your clients' eggs are not in one basket. That's how you diversify your risk. I already mentioned insurance. Always, always, always have insurance, even if you're paying cash for a development. But if you're getting a loan, the bank will not even close. They will not even think about closing until you have all your business liability and your business risk insurance in place. Due diligence. Y'all, doing your due diligence up front and taking the necessary time, even risking losing a deal, doing all the things up front that you need to do is so much better on the back end than trying to rush and close a deal because you think this is the only hot deal out there and it's in the hottest area of town, not realizing that there may be some other issues with that particular piece of property. So don't rush your due diligence process. Be very slow, very diligent. And as I've heard recently on a crazy TikTok phenomenon, be very demure, very mindful with your due diligence. Market research. We've handled this ad nauseum. Make sure you know what the market is doing or is producing for your area so that what you're building makes sense for that area. And lastly, monitoring the property. I have entertained this in the past, hadn't been quite able to make it work, but monitoring the property from a physical perspective with cameras has been my desire. I can't quite get it to work 365, like 365 days a year without having to go back so many times to change the camera and do all of this monitoring and things like that. But if you figure that out, inbox me, please. But that is a strategy of monitoring the property so that you can see what's happening with this development over time and be able to mitigate the risk, especially if there's a hazard that shows up, an animal that comes out of nowhere, a tree that has fallen, or some utility that's down. Monitoring the property helps you to mitigate your risk. Okay? So when you evaluate all the different types of risks, this encourages you to make a contingency plan, make a backup plan, a plan for the plan. What happens if? What happens if the developer, can't get the funding or the resources? You're the developer. What happens if you can't get what you need? What happens next? What's the plan to sell this property at each stage of the development if your client can't keep moving forward? What happens if the builder can't finish the project? Do you know where all the permits are and how to access them online? Because now most municipalities require permitting be done through an online process. Do you have the codes to get in case something happens to your builder? In case the builder's sick and you can't reach them? I cannot tell you how many times I've tried to reach different people throughout the process and they've not been dead. They've just been unavailable. It could be the mountains. It could be, bad service. It could be sickness and illness. It could be the phone just didn't work or got dropped in water and I couldn't reach someone for 3 days. And you think the worst is happening, but you have deadlines you still have to meet. So always have a plan B when you're trying to mitigate the risk of a project. Have some backups, have some contingencies, run some emergency drills. What happens if? Who's the first line of defense, second line of defense, third line of defense? Now, I'm a military child, so I always think that we're going to go to war. So what happens next if we go to war? So plan as if you're going to go to war, but not really. Plan as if someone is unavailable, but you still need the information they have. So how are you going to get that? That's part of your risk as well. And that concludes lesson 9 on managing risk and mitigating. And that concludes lesson 9 on managing and mitigating for risks.